Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. Our interview today is taking place at Coquitlam Public Library, and we're on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of Coquitlam First Nation. So we'd like to thank the Coquitlam people who continue to live on these lands and to care for the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. Today we're joined by Ben Perry, who is with Force of Nature Alliance. And so thank you so much for joining us today, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Nancy.
Ben, can you tell us a little bit about Force of Nature Alliance? What is the goal of the group, and is it specific to the Tri-Cities, or are you part of a larger organization?
Yeah, so Force of Nature Alliance is regional for Metro Vancouver. When we started, Port Moody was, or Tri-Cities was a big part of it, but it's definitely starting in Port Moody. I came on a couple years in. Our goals are to combat climate change. We started with opposing pipelines and getting involved in politics. And I can remember the switch. We were on the knocking on doors, talking to people about pipelines, and there was a lot of discussion about local politics and decisions happening at the city level. So we moved into a campaign called Mission Transition, where we were talking about getting cities off carbon and getting cities to set climate targets to be net zero by 2050. And we succeeded. Port Moody, Coquitlam, Surrey, Vancouver, Richmond, North Shore cities, Langley, all other cities around the world and the region also have adopted these climate targets.
Wow, congratulations. That's great work and a big step in the right direction. Ben, can you tell us a little bit about your partnership with Coquitlam Library?
Yeah, so we've been co-hosting with the library, at the library, these cinema events with speakers. And so we've done, we had a film about grief and climate change, and we had a local author come to talk. We did a film called Eating Our Way to Extinction, which was a real eye-opener for me. I'd always heard people talk about how reducing the amount of meat you eat is really good for climate change. I didn't realize at the time, but apparently it's in the top 10 solutions for climate change. And that film really showed that. You could see the edge of the Amazon forest, or the edge of the soybean fields, where the soybean fields were growing into the Amazon forest at an alarming rate. And 70% of the world's soybeans are being fed to animals to produce meat.
So I think ethically, health-wise, and now environmentally, there's a push and a reason to become less of a meat eater.
Yes, definitely, and it was a big eye-opener for me. So we had some speakers there from Food Not Bombs and a SFU student group that's involved in food security. So we always try and get a speaker and some discussion. Our next one's going to be in March, and we're showing the film Fracking the Peace.
Oh, excellent. So we'll have to keep our eyes open for that. That's coming up.
Yeah, so there should be information on that on our website, and the library will also be promoting it as well. And we'll have a good discussion about the expansion of the natural gas industry in BC, which is at odds with reducing the emissions we're putting out here.
Well, we will watch out for those. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the issues we're seeing with respect to climate change? What are we witnessing here, right here in the Tri-Cities?
Yeah, so I mean, in the Tri-Cities, we're experiencing heat domes, dangerous heat that's hurting people. We're having droughts that's causing our trees to change. Trees are dying. It's hurting our forests. Those are the kind of the environmental costs. And then there's indirect from the environment social costs. I should mention, rising food prices, and we're looking at migration crises too. And some people say the refugees from Syria, that conflict was kicked off partly by a drought and farmers coming to Damascus to demand support from the government, and that kind of started the unrest in Syria back, 5 years ago or 7 years ago? Yeah.
Well, I think you're right. There's so many connections when we start talking about climate change and all of the things that our weather is connected to. We've also seen unprecedented forest fires and smoky air. And I think, even the heat dome, and you're talking about social aspects, people who live on their own and, maybe don't have access to air conditioning or a cool space. So definitely we're seeing a lot of issues in the social as well as environmental. There's one term that comes up all the time, and it's net zero carbon emissions. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means? I think some people, it's a little bit confusing. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. I mean, there are some ways that carbon in the atmosphere is what makes global warming happen or climate change, because it tends to hold heat. And there are ways that carbon can be taken out of the atmosphere. There's really expensive kind of ways that you can do it industrially, but plants and trees, of course, but also algae and all kinds of plants, including vegetables, are sucking carbon out of the air and out of the atmosphere. But we're putting out more carbon than the plants can take in because we're digging it up from the grounds, carbon that might have been deposited there millions of billions of years ago by plants a long time ago. And so we're growing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere every year, and we've been doing it since humans started industrial scale burning of things.
Right. So, in the overall scheme of things, where do we stand in the Tri-Cities? Are we doing better or worse, or just where are we in the overall scheme of things?
Well, I think we're starting to change, which is good. Um, so cities in Canada are responsible for like 70% of carbon emissions. And in Metro Vancouver, the two biggest sources are buildings from the heating systems and personal vehicles, so the cars and trucks we drive every day. So we're making some progress. Cars and trucks, we're starting to see more EVs. We've got SkyTrain. Hopefully, we're getting more transit.
Options.
And people, in terms of homes, people are starting to put in heat pumps, retrofit. New buildings are starting to be set up with heat pumps.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the actions that cities specifically could take to get us closer to that net zero?
Yeah, so the provincial government has set up something called Zero Carbon Step Code, which is a campaign we're actually working on in Coquitlam. To get this, because this Zero Carbon Step Code is like optional. It's got steps that the cities can adopt. There's a certain level that will be mandatory at some point, but cities can adopt it much earlier at a much higher level.
Quickly or slower?
And it's not about old buildings, it's about new buildings. So why build stuff now that uses a gas heating system when we know we need to go electric? That's one thing. I mean, the other thing is about if we can retrofit and change our heating systems, that's like a big chunk of the battle.
Talking about putting in a heat pump.
Yeah, so an electric heat pump, especially with our clean electricity in BC, that's a zero emission way of heating your home. And you get air conditioning too, which is important in the heat domes. But the other thing is the vehicles, and cities have certain power related to vehicles. They can set rules about how much parking needs to be provided. They can design their cities in ways that make it easier for people to use transit, as long as they're given the freedom by the provincial government to do so. And there's been some changes to that recently, but with the provincial government's bills 44 through 47 started telling cities how they have to densify. I don't know if they got it right for climate or housing. I mean, I think better is to create a slightly denser, medium density, walkable area where people would make the choice and say, I can live without a car, save that $10,000 a year, use transit. There's frequent bus or, a bus that goes to SkyTrain, and all the shops are nearby.
Well, I think you're right. I think that it's this Bill 44, 46, and 47 that you're talking about. It's a top-down, it's implementing a required minimum density, mandatory minimum densities. But I think cities have put a lot of planning into place in some cases, some better than others, to create those communities. And things like concerns with the urban forest, with this densification. Do trees have a part to play in climate change?
Yeah, Nancy, I know you love trees, and I do too. maybe not as much as you, but almost as much. And so I think trees are really important for climate change. Of course, they take carbon out of the atmosphere, and they help to keep our cities cool during the heat domes. That's proven, like really a lot cooler. I do think there's a misconception that we're going to plant trees and get ourselves out of the carbon problem, that there's going to be enough carbon sucked out of the atmosphere. So I did a little math on it. A mature tree maybe takes in 50 pounds of carbon a year, whereas a furnace for a home puts out 200 times that much carbon in a year. So we'd need to plant 200 trees to offset one gas furnace. I don't think we're going to do that in Tri-Cities.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I would love to see that happen, but I agree it's probably not likely to happen. And I just want to put the last word in for trees here, that they do a lot more than just, I mean, they are taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but they're also cooling our hot urban environments and helping us to manage stormwater, good for our mental health and a lot of other things. So they do have a small part to play, as you say, in taking carbon out of the city air. So, Ben, can you tell us? We've talked a little bit about what cities can do. What can individuals do? Like, what can we do ourselves on an individual basis to help draw down that carbon?
Yeah, I mean, individuals have powers to, but collective action's the best. But I mean, within the city, of course, if you can change your heating system, or if you can group together with the people in your building to help change it might take a work at the strata level. If you can find ways to not use a gas vehicle, if you can afford an electric vehicle, or if you can choose to live without one. But these are all decisions that depend on how our city's built. So we need to take action. We need to tell the city of Coquitlam, the city of Port Moody, the city of Port Coquitlam that we want to be able to live car-free, and that we want all new buildings to be built without gas. And then, I mean, in terms of lifestyle, there's a lot of things where we're purchasing products that have a carbon footprint. Yeah. But, I mean, I don't think it's fair to ask the individuals that care to do all the work when it's not even going to be enough, because there's people that don't care or don't believe in it, and they're going to be emitting enough carbon to continue global warming. So it has to be collective action.
So we need some policy in place by government. We each need to step up and take responsibility. It's going to take the whole community to fight this one. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that Force of Nature Alliance is involved with locally?
Yeah, so like I said, we're hoping to get gas out of buildings. In Coquitlam, we're focusing right now with a partner called Neighbors United on encouraging Coquitlam to adopt the zero carbon step code at the highest level. So new buildings will be built with zero emission heating systems. But we're doing that at the regional level. North Shore's doing the same thing right now in Burnaby. Metro Vancouver they've been working on this too. There's a very progressive group of people there. They just actually, unfortunately, they had a vote that didn't pass where they were going to do more consultation to maybe start creating a regulation on the biggest buildings. 2% of buildings in Metro Vancouver, these really tall towers, emit like 35% of carbon emissions. Yeah. And so Metro Vancouver has the power to regulate air quality, and so they're actually able to regulate emissions.
Interesting.
That vote was sort of stalled in the last vote, but we did have some local, like Megan Lottie from Port Moody voted in favor of it. It's going to take some more work, and Force of Nature being regional, we want to influence the Metro Vancouver votes as well. So, and we could use all the help we could get. So write a letter to your city council. They send a representative to Metro Vancouver.
Excellent. So some action that we can take ourselves to encourage our governments to make those proper decisions.
Get gas out of buildings, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you're also involved in a Sue Big Oil campaign that's running right now?
Yes, so we've been supporting the Sue Big Oil campaign. It's I think a BC-wide campaign because it's focused on the courts of BC, the jurisdiction in BC that would allow this to happen. The court's structured so that cities could actually sue oil companies. And a local activist group called Laudato Si Circle in Port Moody was doing Sue Big Oil, and they contacted us and said, "Hey, could you help us?" And we said, "Of course. We're Force of Nature Alliance. We want to be in alliance with what you're doing, which is great." And we think, Port Moody has always been progressive, on ahead of the curve on climate, and there's a number of members of that council, the mayor, and who've taken action on climate in the past and voted in favor of things like climate targets. And we're hopeful that they'll do this Sue Big Oil. When enough cities join this lawsuit, it'll go into action. So.
And I think there's a rally on February 13th
Yes.
at Port Moody City Hall to have to listen to the delegation to support that Sue Big Oil campaign. And Ben, can you tell us, how can people get in touch with you if they want to join Force of Nature Alliance, or if there's volunteer opportunities? How would they contact you?
Yes, so you can find us on social media. There's the regional Force of Nature social media. There's also, just look up Tri-Cities Force of Nature I think we're on Facebook and Instagram. You can send us messages there. We also have a website called forceofnaturealliance.wordpress.com.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for sharing that with us and for telling us a little bit more about Force of Nature. And I hope that we'll be able to talk again sometime in the future.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks for joining us. This is We've Got Issues, and we've been talking to Ben Perry about Force of Nature Alliance.